Hi, everybody. My esteemed panel of wonderful guests. My name is Ian Schafer. I am the former founder and CEO of a ad agency called Deep Focus, but now the co-founder and CEO of an organization called Kindred. That is bringing an ecosystem of content creators, brands, platforms, and nonprofits together to accelerate the next generation of social movements, actually in line with UN Sustainable Development Goals. Our mission is to make really complicated social movements easier to participate in and too difficult for everyone to ignore. And that's why I'm really excited to have this group of people here who've been doing that professionally and for many years, not too many years. You guys are all very young, as am I. So we're lucky to be joined by Jennifer Cohan, who's the president of Edelman New York. And who works closely with many brands to chart their course for good. We've got Stacey Monero over on the end here, global head of content creation at Twitter, and Armando Turco, who is the SVP of content and commerce at Vox Media. Thank you for being here today, guys. What to do is start by asking you guys a couple of questions, and Jennifer, I'll start with you. So obviously, as an agency, you have clients. And those clients have brands. I think one area that we've now realized that brands, because of the size of their platforms, the size of the audience that they speak to on a regular basis, they have taken on the mantle of responsibility for using their storytelling powers for good. And they've created positive change in communities. How have they been able to do that? Kind of ranging the spectrum from kind of like contributor to actually true activists.
Yeah, I'm actually going to take it just a tiny bit of a step back. We conduct a study every year on trust. And what we look at is trust in four institutions: NGOs, government, media, and business. And within business, we also look at trust in brands. And one of the dynamics that we've seen over the last couple of years in many countries around the world is there's been an absolute collapse in trust in government, regardless of where people sit on a political spectrum. And what they're expecting is for brands to step in and fill that breach. People really believe that they have power of their pocketbook. But the expectations that people have of how brands behave in terms of solving social problems is actually pretty far from how effectively people believe that brands are actually doing it. So about 87% of people say that it's really important for brands to solve social ills, but only 1 in 3 believe that they're doing it well. And the reason for that is that too few brands are actually making real change. Many of them are sort of sprinkling purpose on top of marketing or on top of campaigns versus using power of their brand to enact real change.
Yeah, and so I guess maybe I'll turn this question over to the publisher and the platform here, right? So brands can tell stories, I guess, in theory directly, but the means of distribution for those stories are often, again, like publishers and platforms. So I guess firstly, Armando, like interestingly enough, as a publisher, you're not just a topical publisher, but you're also a news organization. So you're bringing like sets of like facts and figures to these issues that probably like lend to the gravitas of the way that people perceive them. How would you see your role in your ability to get these messages across for people so that they can decide, audiences can decide whether or not it's something that they want to get involved with? And then from a brand perspective, how are they working with you guys to make that message one that is believable and trustworthy?
Yeah, I think we have to toe a line because we want to create content for brands that is helping to drive progress in some way for the audience. But we have to toe this line between, we have to maintain the integrity of journalism, even though it isn't pure journalism, because it's work that we're doing within for brands, so it has a commercial purpose to it, but also make sure that the brand is represented in an accurate way and in a fair way, and the good work that they're doing to actually drive social progress is being communicated and is being celebrated, right? And if ultimately the intention is for brands to move people, then it's sort of moving that KPI as well. One particular way that we do it is we sort of look into the newsroom and into the Vox newsroom in particular, and Vox is a news brand that's sort of positioned around explaining the news. The insight being that like people have so much news to consume, so much of it bite-sized, so much of it ephemeral, that like, even if you read all the daily news, you sort of like, or you read all the daily tweets, you sort of lack the context to understand like, why does this matter? Why does it matter to me? What is ultimately the long-term impact of the story that I'm reading? And so we created a format of journalism that we call explanatory journalism. In my group, we perform the same service for brands. And so what we advise brands is, regardless of what you're doing, we like to say understanding is the key to responsibility. People first need to understand an issue and unpack the issue and understand the context surrounding it in order for us to expect them to do anything about it. And that is a very valuable role that brands can play in providing education. So if a brand is, for instance, supporting underserved communities, we might create explainer content for that brand that's unpacking like the statistics and some of the dynamics and sort of insights around that.
And how do they look at the results of something like that, right? Like, so they're drawing an association with that issue, but how do they know, whether or not that's, doing it for them? Because clearly this is not, even though like you're talking about, yes, content and commerce, like this is not the classic bottom of the funnel advertising lead generation stuff that they're doing. So this is more at the top. So how do they look at the performance of something like that?
Yeah, to be honest, I mean, as with any communication or marketing effort, there's a number of different sort of signals that you can read and a number of different studies that can be conducted. We often pair a lot of the work. I mean, we look at the raw media KPIs to make sure, first and foremost, that people are actually spending time with the content, and they are sometimes to the tune of 3, 4, or 5 minutes for a short form digital video, which is really exceptional, which shows that people are actually interested in diving into some of these topics. I think the sort of short answer though is that like there really still isn't a good way, and that's something that we're thinking about, translating the sort of the receipt of the message and the engagement with the content to some action taken as a result, or some mind changed, or some eye opened. And so we're spending a little bit of time right now with our research and insights group to try to figure out like what actually is the right combination of metrics that can give us the clearest signal that like impact has occurred.
Yeah, got it.
And are open to help from partners and try and figure that out as well.
Sure. I mean, so I guess, Armando, you mentioned like moving people. I hear that and I'm thinking like both emotionally and physically. I think, Stacey, like when you look at just Twitter and some of the major moments in time that, you could in many ways say, yes, it happened in real life, but it just as well, it also happened on Twitter.
Sure.
What is the role that Twitter has played in literally like kind of moving people emotionally in movements, and then actually moving them physically to things like, say, like a march or a political uprising?
Yeah. So when we think about Twitter, it's what's happening in the world, it's what people are talking about, and people come to learn what's happening in the world. It's essentially a discovery platform where people come, they're influential, they're opinionated, they want to connect with each other around shared ideals. And it's a place where you can spark a movement or mobilize a message. So we see people come together around a common cause or a conversation that's designed to drive social impact. So that could be Me Too. It could be, you're seeing right now hashtag Bet on Women, which is tied to Women's World Cup, and the whole conversation around gender equity and pay equity. And then that hashtag starts to take on another use case, just to talk about equality more broadly. So it's interesting to see how people can use that to galvanize in an effort to drive some type of societal change.
So galvanize is something, is an effect that actually like really does happen on Twitter in real time. I'm a firm believer in that the community is elastic and it kind of expands and contracts around moments of time or pieces of content. So yes, it is galvanizing, but I think in many ways like it can also be polarizing. I think the social media in general has been like a bit of like an outrage-based operating system for many people, but which is in many ways good, right? Because it's a place for people to actually vent and find common thought. I would say though that it also has an effect of maybe making some brands tentative when they kind of like try to dip their toes either into a conversation or even like embrace an issue that's near and dear to their employees' hearts. But there might be that kind of fear of alienation that might happen. I'm curious, Schafer, like how you've worked with clients to avoid those.
Yeah, it's a really important issue. A lot of companies, they see that taking a stand on social issues really matters to their consumers, and increasingly that it also really matters to their employees.
Yeah.
And generally our advice to clients is to really stick to what you know and to that which is closest to you. It's really easy for brands to wade into waters where they're getting caught up in political storms that aren't really of their making, and those storms can last for them for a long time. Conversely, where companies have taken action very quickly and taken it in a really substantive way, they've seen real benefits. So for example, when Starbucks had the incident in Philadelphia, what they could have done was issued an apology in a newspaper and made good to the two gentlemen who were affected only, but instead what they did was that they closed all of their stores around the United States to ensure that they were getting a deeper level of inclusion training. And so companies taking stands and wading in where it really affects them it's just common sense, but it's common sense that too often is easily ignored.
So you might think that it's common sense in many cases, but I think often like brands who are the ones investing in a lot of this messaging, like also see like risk. And I think, you know, the ad industry is in a constant struggle between like inspiring people to take risks, which is, I mean, we're here in Cannes. I mean, I think that's what it's all about, right? But also kind of risk mitigation in many ways, you know, through like careful spending of money. And I think we've even seen like, even no matter how careful you are with spending your money, if you do any of it programmatically, your ads might wind up on questionable websites, for example, right? And so, you know, I guess the question maybe for each of you, but especially the kind of platform and publisher, right? Like, how do you, like in your sales pitch, you know, to brands, you know, how are you talking to them about like the role that riskiness or risk aversion plays in aligning themselves with issues that, you know, people genuinely do feel passionately about, but potentially one way or the other?
Yeah, so I can kick off first. I think there's a continuum. So we talk about aligning with universal issues and causes people care about. You saw that with Verizon. They positioned their company as an enabler of hurricane relief, and sort of they're invested in the public service and safety space. They've made investments for a long time, so now they're opening up communication about that. And so everybody can relate to all the natural disasters they're seeing around the world. So shining a light on the first responders as the engine of those heroic efforts is something everybody can connect to. The other side of the continuum is wading more into sort of the policy or political waters, which we only advise if that really is core to your ethos and your DNA, and you probably have a very niche target audience and you know what they stand for. And so we used to say, you know, you can take a stand without taking sides, and that's still true. But we're seeing companies like Tom's are getting behind ending gun violence. They did a whole campaign on Twitter where you can actually send a postcard to your representative, asking them to vote on universal background checks. We see Patagonia backing candidates that are focused on environmental reform. So there's a lot more sort of advocacy around the political landscape that's interesting to see unfold.
And those brands are sort of built from that kind of advocacy,
Yes.
right? It's not for every kind of brand, a Tom's or Patagonia.
Exactly.
That's so core to their DNA, so it's also really authentic
Exactly.
to them, and they really know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that shifts between now and the 2020 election as well. We have a lot of interesting conversations with clients, and by interesting, I mean challenging, where, you know, they want to completely avoid any environment that feels like it could be political in nature, where there's even political overtones. And I understand that to a certain extent, but also like it is important for you to be, especially when we're telling these kinds of stories about like how brands are influencing society and culture and causes, to be in proximity of the information that can make savvier, smarter consumers, and to in fact support that by where you're spending your media dollars. So again, that's not for everyone. A slightly contradictory thought to that is that brand safety does in fact matter, and often the safety is not so much from, and the risk does not necessarily come from the context or the message itself, but from where you put it. So a big effort that we've undertaken is to essentially build a marketplace, build a distribution platform that we call Concert, where we join forces with NBC Universal and 20 or 30 other premium publishers, where we can guarantee that we can deliver really great content, high quality content, but do that in environments that we know are completely trustworthy, because you just know where your great content is gonna show up. So it's a bit cliche to say the medium is the message, but the context actually matters
So, you mentioned the word storytelling. So, we're kind of in a, I think it's wonderful, like in a golden age of documentaries. So like with all like the proliferation of all the over-the-top subscription options or just free ad-supported options there are for consumers, there actually is a marketplace for documentaries. It used to be a place where you went to make a name for yourself, but now it's become like there's a market, people are willing to buy them, and clearly that is driven by a lot of the things that are happening in the real world. Armando, from your perspective, can brands be, I guess, effective documentarians of things that are happening, or is there always, and I guess the follow-up question to this is for all of you, do brands have like a trust hurdle that they need to get over in being primary storytellers, or are they always going to have to work with some kind of third party, to facilitate the topic of that story?
I think it's less about who does it. I think the answer to your first question is that like not only should they be thinking like documentarians when it comes to the content that they create, but like they have to, right? Because if these are the kinds of stories we want to tell, I think we've seen a lot of brands who try to tell that story, but they put it through an advertising machine and expect that what's going to come out the other side is going to be an authentic, beautifully told, and meaningful and emotionally resonant story. What comes out is like a contrived sort of scripted ad-like thing, and that's where you see a lot of the most sort of rejection happening from consumers, where it's like, oh, you just gave me a very staged scripted thing, I won't name specific brands, but there's been a couple of really famous examples in the past couple of years. So I think you just have to put it through a different machine. Who does that, and whether it's sort of the brand doing it themselves, or they're working with partners, or increasingly working with brand and entertainment outfits. We've actually just acquired a brand and entertainment outfit for this specific purpose, because we've got a lot of brands coming to us saying, like, I realize that if I want to land my message and I want to establish a story on a certain topic, like, I can't do that in 30 seconds. I need to do it in a podcast series, or I need to do it in a long-term program.
So it seems that there's like a month for everything now. So like there's and by the way, like I think this is a good thing, especially for like the big macro issues that deserve the attention. So like May, for example, is Mental Health Awareness Month. Going back to my agency days, a lot of brands, especially like since the advent of social media and platforms, they had to actually have content calendars, right? And yes, if you are Dunkin', just Dunkin', and it was National Donut Day, like that day is for you, and you're going to be there, with your stuff. Interestingly, for example, on April 20th, which is a day that in the world of cannabis culture is kind of a big day, like Ben and Jerry's posted a tweet, for example, that had a big picture of a giant like marijuana bud, and they were basically saying that, hey, like 80% of people incarcerated for drug possession are actually people of color. And like, this is an important issue, and it was commentary on criminal justice reform on a day that is filled with jokes and lightheartedness. That they made a serious statement. Do you see, Stacey, any trends, as it pertains to like certain areas of impact? Is it the Sustainable Development Goals? Like, what are the things that are getting brands, turned on to purpose from your perspective?
So, just to build on a point you made earlier around sort of backing up your proposition, one of the interesting trends is that brands moving towards commitments versus just campaigns. They're doing something versus just saying something. So Aerie, who is making a commitment to not airbrush or Photoshop any of their imagery, it's a commitment that backs up the communication. Airbnb saying, we're going to help 100,000 displaced people during natural disasters, or refugees, because they have this whole campaign called Belong Anywhere. So I think those are trends that we're seeing. But it's interesting because we talked earlier about how culture can shape perception around societal issues. And if you go back to the criminal justice reform, Kim Kardashian discovered a video on Twitter from a publisher about Alice Marie Johnson, who was incarcerated. And then she lobbied POTUS for clemency. And that happened, and that came to fruition. And then there's been this whole sort of evolution in that discussion and debate. That was not one singular moment that drove the change, but I think it's all of these voices coming to the surface and coming together to shift that change in the right direction.
I would also just add from a Ben & Jerry's standpoint is that that kind of a stand is very authentic
Mhm.
to that kind of brand,
Sure.
not
Right.
like
Yeah.
Patagonia and Tom's, as we were talking
Yeah.
about earlier, is they really have permission to take stands because they've been taking them all along,
Yeah.
whether it be marriage equality and other sorts of social
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah, the consistency of action is as important as just an action.
That's
Yeah.
exactly right. They live their values, don't
That's
just
right.
talk about it or sort of sprinkle it on top.
So interesting. So Ben and Jerry's is actually, I mean, they've been around for a while, but that's actually probably the oldest brand that we've mentioned. And I was kind of, so like, how are you guys seeing, like the heritage brands, and brands have been around forever, and maybe didn't even found it on a purpose, but 150 years later, that purpose is maybe not as relevant to the marketplace as it once was. Is there,
You think about telling stories over chapters, Dove launched Campaign for Real Beauty 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So if they're tweeting about Ben on Women, it feels really authentic.
Yeah.
Because they built that foundation and that credibility over time. So you do have to start somewhere, but I think the more you build and the more you demonstrate, the more equity that you earn and create.
And we've worked on Dove since the beginning,
Yeah.
so I'm delighted to hear you talk
Yeah.
about that,
References
because
all
it's
their
something that is, it's a real model. And that what Dove has been at it since the beginning, it's not quite 20 years, but it's pretty close, where they have consistently challenged definitions of what beauty means so that women see themselves represented. And what they've done is, as media has evolved, they've
Yes.
changed as well. So most recently, they formed a partnership with Getty Images
Mhm.
so that there's a more diverse image bank of
Yeah.
women. They also are the single most prolific educator of girls and women around self-esteem,
Mhm.
35 million people over the last several years. So they really are taking action and doing it over time.
Great.
Yeah.
So to kind of like bring this all together, we are all in many ways like card-carrying members of the advertising industry, one way or another. What is the single most important thing that we can do, to encourage more of this to happen, to have more responsibilities taken from some of the biggest companies?
I think we can use our connections and insight and expertise to connect people around common causes. I think as we can connect the dots across brands and clients and agencies, I think there's more we can do there to harness the power of the collective.
Yeah, I think in a macro sense, for sure. I think though, there's a lot of micro decisions that we make every single day, and some of them we just make on autopilot, and we really stop to think about like this, like the collective impact of a lot of our very small decisions. I've had some really sticky conversations with clients about casting in even just a 30-second commercial where we're proposing that we cast an African-American female, and that they didn't believe was representative of their demographic. And so we have to have like some pretty civil, but like tense conversations about these things, and like we should be having more of them, and then collectively that needs to change, because all of a sudden the representation or the makeup of the people that appear in the work that we do looks very different. Yeah, so I think it's like a series of very small steps combined with just acknowledging the fact that we as media companies and platforms and agencies and brands like have this collective power that in some ways rivals governments.
Mhm.
And I don't think we've ever really talk about brands in that context. But this, can be achieved as much through commerce as it can be through government and civic action.
I love what you just said about the power of brands. And I think that the one build that I would make to that is that also there is power for brands in doing the right thing, is that that people want something to believe in. And in a time when they can't believe in their governments, they believe in brands, and brands taking action is going to be rewarded with people's loyalty to those products. So everybody, it really is a win-win.
Yeah, I agree. And I would say that kind of the spirit of all this, I would encourage everyone to take a more collaborative approach to all the stuff that we're doing. I mentioned how difficult it is to talk the talk, and it's even harder to walk the walk, but I think we get to where we want to go faster if we're walking here together. So hopefully we will continue to collaborate on this conversation even after the camera shuts down, and that the whole industry will as well. So thank you very much, guys.